G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 4 of True Blue Conversations. I just want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, 25-4 Coffee, for troopers, by troopers. For all your coffee needs, head to www.254.com.au. G'day, welcome to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today's special guest is James Koens. And James served in the Army, in the Armoured Cav, and then transferred to the Hilo side as a air crewman. James now works for Toll Rescue as a rescue air crewman. And he's also a deputy captain in the Royal Fire Service, yeah baby, and he is deployed on multiple trips to Canada in 2021 and this year in 2023, assisting with the wildfires over there. And he has joined us today to talk about his amazing career. Hi, James. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Hey, bud. Good to be here.
No, mate. Thank you. It's an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on the show. So, James, can you tell us about you as a young fella? Where'd you grow up and what was life like as a young whippersnapper?
Yeah, one of 6 kids. It was tough fending for yourself. So, I grew up in the majority of Southern Highlands, or at least the sort of rural south of Sydney. Was born in Camden, and then, grew up in the Southern Highlands, went to school down there, both in Mittagong and Bowral, and then later, family moved down the south coast, but it was good. Yeah, I was, not incredibly academic at school, so a lot of my time was spent running around the paddocks that we had on the farm and getting hands-on and joining the fireys, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Occupying myself with, playing soldiers and running around and, a bit of a class clown through school, but, enjoyed it for the most part, went right through to, year 12 and found my calling at the end of that.
So, for you, what was your first job when you left school? As a young fella.
Yeah, funnily enough, the first job was I actually worked in a pharmacy. I was a pharmacy assistant, I think they called it back then. It was my first job, 14 and a half or something like that. Just worked the counter of a pharmacy. As soon as I could work, I did, and then that was fairly short-lived. I think it was probably 6 months or something like that, and then ended up working on a farm as a farmhand nearby after school, and that was the main job through school.
So was there, obviously I mentioned that you went the military route later on down the track, which we'll get into, but was there any family history of military service before you joined, or were you the first?
Not immediately. So my granddad had served, absolutely, but he was migrated, he's of Dutch heritage, so my father came over when he was about 12 years old, so his father was grew up in Holland. But no, in terms of immediate family, I'm it. My sister shortly followed, but and my grandfather on my mother's side was also, he served, but sort of home guard, I guess, at that stage. And
Yeah, nice. And so everyone remembers where they were on 9/11 when it happened. Where were you?
Sure. I was in year 6 at school, I think, at that stage. And as much as I can remember from back then, but as I've said before, I remember the teacher wheeling in the TV and putting on what was going on. And that's my moment.
I remember it too, mate. I was 8 years old and I was getting ready for school.
Yeah.
And I turned on the TV and I was like, where's Cheese TV? Like, where's, remember Cheese TV? Yeah. So I think I would have been year 4, I think. So I'm a couple of years younger than you. And literally I went, oh, geez, what the, what's, and at first, mate, I thought it was a movie. Like, I thought it was a movie, and I thought, and then when I saw the second one hit, I was like, yeah, no, this isn't a movie. This is for real. And it changed the world that day, I think, that everyone remembers, like, and it was funny, I was speaking to a couple of other veterans that said, where were you when JFK was killed, and where were you in this? And, mate, you remember where you were. You were in a classroom watching it on in year 6. And did you think at that stage that you would end up fighting in Afghanistan years later, or it just, because you were so young, you just was there a moment that you went, I need to help someone, or?
Yes and no. As much as a kid as you can think, that's where I need to be. But there was a moment in that I thought, well, I guess at that stage I was still looking for a calling, or not necessarily looking. As a kid, you hadn't worked it out yet. And I think for me, when I saw that, I was like, oh, maybe I have worked it out. And I knew that that's what I probably wanted to get involved in. It was still many years off at that stage, and a lot of schooling to get through first. But yeah, I felt like that was the first time I was like, okay, I think I know what I want to do when I grow up.
Yep.
And that was that moment.
And so that was one of the reasons that you joined the army, but was there any other reasons that you joined and wanted to serve your country?
It all started in high school really after that, other than that moment. So that was, again, year 6. So the following year I went to high school and then joined the Army Cadets. Whether that was as a direct result of that, or whether it was just, I got into high school and thought that looks pretty cool, I'll do that. Like I said, I wasn't hugely academic, so I was always looking for that next, I wanted to be an adult the next day. I wanted to be yesterday. I wanted to grow up. I wanted to get out into the world and start doing things.
Yep.
And one of those was army, like what young fella didn't want to play soldiers. And then for me, it was a possible reality. Yeah. So I thought, well, that's something meaningful I could do, something exciting. It's an adventure, and yeah, it's a way to give back.
Isn't it funny, mate? I remember as a kid something that you just touched on of, can't wait to be an adult, and it's like now you do anything to go back to being a kid, no responsibilities, nothing, and it's
jokes on me. Huh?
Oh yeah, mate. I said the same thing, and Mum goes, "Don't wish your life away," and and she goes, "School's the best time of your life," and it sure was. I can tell you. So yeah, Mum, you were right. So
absolutely.
And so you actually joined you joined the Rural Fire Service, and we'll touch on that now. You joined in 2003. This was before you went to the Army.
Yeah.
What was it about the that drew you to the RFS? What was it calling to give back, or what was the main reason you joined the RFS?
Yeah, I guess it's I'd love to say it was for community and service, but I think as a young fella, at least for me anyway, you still don't have that part of your brain developed. I think I knew I wanted to probably as a kid at that stage, it was more, I wanted sort of meaning. I wanted purpose. And if that meant that it was doing something that other people would benefit from, it's probably more from that angle rather than being that mature brain that says, yep, I need to give back for what the community's given me. Certainly wasn't that. But not only that, we had a fire go through our place in 2001, the Christmas fires. Which was sort of 2 years before I joined. So again, that was another one of that sort of 9/11 type of thing where it was like, okay, maybe that's what I want to do. Yep. So when I was old enough, my dad took me up to the fire station, and as young as I could, and that's where it started. So it was a bit of that little sort of insight into what the fireys did. So I thought that's another thing I could be doing, rather than running around getting in trouble. So
and for you, was there, like, from, obviously it's a little bit different to the Army, but was there any life lessons that you learned about yourself in those younger years in the RFS that you could take forward when you went to training and basic training at the Army?
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, and I remind the brigade of that every time I see the old boys, to not discredit the power that you have with your younger members in a brigade. It's sure, you'll have those that won't necessarily take it too seriously, but just want to come along because it's something cool to do, which is probably why most of us do it. But for some, you have a very real impact on the development of your members in your brigade. You're just not teaching them how to fight fires. You're teaching them how to be an adult. And for most kids, that's the first exposure they get to responsibility and accountability. And that's what it was for me. Like, I hadn't been, I'd sort of farm animals growing up and took care of a lot of those. And so that was my first little bit of responsibility. But in the RFS, it was, you are accountable now. Absolutely. Whether it was something as small as, one of the seniors saying, well, you every week I just want you to empty a locker, check all the equipment, clean it out, and put all the equipment back in. That was my job. Was my really, when you said what's my first job, that was probably it, right? Just wasn't paid for it. The life lessons is just, again, the huge ones are the responsibility, the accountability, and having to grow about 10 years. as a young fella.
I know, mate. I used to, because I joined a few years after you, and I was 19 when I joined. So, and I actually wish that I had joined earlier, but I just didn't have the time at that stage. And I remember a deputy used to say to me every Wednesday and Saturday, "Go and get a hose, bowl and roll, bowl and roll." And I was just like, and it became so monotonous. I'm like, why am I doing this? And it just. But he was building the muscle memory to, that in life and death situation, it's just muscle memory can just do it and go, and like connecting the hoses and doing all that sort of stuff. And I'm just like, at the time I was like, why am I doing this? And then when you put it into practice, you're like, oh. It all comes back to you, and you're like, aha, this is why. And mate, exactly right. Like the life lessons that you learn, and also your training can save your life. Like it's, that's the reason you train, and you probably know it too now because you're still active today, and you see it the people that train, and you see it the ones that don't train, and you can see the difference between everything's a bit clunkier when they're not training, but when they are training, it's just like it's a fluid, dynamic, all systems go. And so it's a massive thing, and I learn a lot about myself as well, like when I first joined. And it's I think volunteering is something that's fallen to the wayside. And like, in your opinion, do you agree? Like, you feel that people don't have the time these days to volunteer, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that probably culture has waned a little bit over the decades. And it is that, we are a generation that is more time poor than ever. There are just so many things going on that consume that time, that people just don't have the time to give up, and for free as well nowadays. And there is a bit of that, if I'm not getting paid for it or not getting something out of it, then why? That's why the RFS is one of those many volunteer agencies, but that's why you generally look at volunteer agencies. They're, and I've got no shame in saying they're a typical demographic, right? They might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, and I might not be the smartest person around, but it's all in the heart. It's all because it's their community. They have a vested interest in making sure it works, and they're the types of people that we just you typically find in those rural environments. And
it's something that stuck with me, mate. That I had it many years ago. A fellow firefighter say it to me, and he said, and it stuck with me ever since, is that never knock the heart of a volunteer. Like someone who's willingly coming forward to volunteer to do something. And that's something that stuck with me for the longest time. And I think you're right. I think, you and, I'll go on, I don't want to go on record saying this, but I will, that you're right, what you said in that, there are some people that are, that aren't the sharpest tool in the shop, but they've got a vested interest in what they what they do, and it's, mate, I'll never knock the heart of a volunteer ever. Like, and it's anyone that willingly volunteers to put their life on the line for free. Mate, you've got my respect. Like, you've got my respect 100%. And I think you're right. I think it is something that is, time management is a big thing these days. And hopefully into the future, mate, I hope it doesn't drop away, but we'll see what happens. But you ask, I know we're seeing it in our brigade that they're just not, the recruitment's just not coming like it used to. Like, it's a lot slower now, and the people that do come, they're committed. They actually want to be there. So, and you, mate, as you say, it's you're asking people to do something for free. A lot of people go, well, why should I? Like, so, but like you said, it was a great lessons you learnt going forward, and then so we move forward now, and I'll talk about, there's a couple of deployments that I want to get to later on with your RFS that it's important and pretty cool what you've been able to do. And it's funny because I'm coming live from James's place, and he's actually getting ready for another deployment, so as we speak. So, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And in 2006, you joined the Army Reserves as a cavalry scout. And what is this role as a cavalry scout? What do you do, and what made you go reserves and not full time at that stage? Yeah,
it's again, because I was in the cadets, it's sort of I thought, oh, the next, I'm loving this, so the next opportunity is to join the army. But I knew I wanted to finish year 12. My parents and myself were pretty adamant on that. I just thought, well, I don't really want to leave just yet. I'm not, I don't feel that need to leave at year 10, for example, in New South Wales. But I just thought, no, I want to finish school, but I want to do this at the same time. So I did that. So I spent my year 11 school holidays down at Kapuka doing boot camp. So finished year 11, went off to Kapuka for 4 weeks, and then came back and finished year 12 and concurrently did the Army Reserve. So I guess that's a reason why I didn't go full-time straight away. And I also wanted it's very well known to be a try before you buy type of system. So I thought, well, before I get myself tied into a 4-year contract, I'll just make sure it's for me. Joined, and then ended up in Armoured Corps as a cavalry scout. Now, originally, when I was recruited, I was supposed to go as an armoured vehicle crewman in the old M113s, the buckets. But just as I was going through training, or through initial training anyway, they re-rolled the whole capability and said, no, we're taking on the M113s away. They took them all away for upgrade. To give them to the full-time units, and so we were left with Land Rovers on steroids and this new concept of this Cav Scout, which basically didn't exist until that point. So the whole role of the Cav Scout back then was basically a reconnaissance element for armoured vehicles. So you'd be integrated within Armoured Corps, and in the full-time service, which we'll talk about later, is what I ended up doing again for the first year or so, was replace the Land Rover with an ASLAV or M113A1 upgraded, and then you would say pull up to a hostile bridge or a choke point or whatever. So rather than sending your armoured vehicle through to potential ambush, you'd dismount your Cav Scouts, and they would then basically file off onto the sides of the road and clear that obstacle. So you'd go through and make sure there wasn't an ambush waiting. To then, and also, check out the bridge, no explosives, all that sort of stuff, make sure it's safe, and then support the movement of those vehicles through.
So sort of, sorry to cut you off, mate,
Yeah.
sort of a mix between like combat engineer role dash still Cav role, is that
Well, probably more infantry, yeah. So it's like somewhat of an infantryman, but with an Armoured Corps context. So I guess that's what made the difference up is that we just had a bit more of an intimate knowledge of how armoured vehicles moved and needed to move and what their functions were. So we knew the type of obstacle they could move through. We knew what needed to be cleared and what didn't, and we could just be an embedded element within the vehicles. So, and then on the infantry on the other hand, who obviously do that extremely well, we formed smaller teams of that. And again, in that Armoured Corps context. So we were very much relying on our vehicles though. So we would only project forward a certain distance where infantry are clearly self-sufficient for an extended period of time. So it was the main role of the Cav Scout.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you, at that stage, were you 17 when you went Army Reserve? Or?
Yeah, so I literally started the application as soon as you could, and at that stage, I don't know if it still is, but it was 16 and 9 months, I think it was. You could put in your application.
So what was Kapuka like being a young fella at 17, having people shout in your face, and was it full on? Like
absolutely.
And what did you learn about yourself through Kapuka?
Yeah, it was a shock, and it wasn't. It's probably easy in hindsight to forget a lot of those shocks, but it was a shock for everyone. It was difficult. It was exactly what it was designed to be. But I felt like, for me, looking back, I don't recall ever an occasion where I was like, I don't think this is for me, or I need to get out. I think it was the pressure I needed. It was, as I said, when I was younger, I was like, I want to be an adult tomorrow. I was being an adult, at 16 and a half, 17 at that stage. I was like, well, there's no quicker way to become an adult than what I'm experiencing right now, and you asked for it and you got it. So huge lessons out of that. So just, we spoke about it in the RFS a bit with your bowling and rolling stuff. And yes, whilst that is a critical basic skill you need to have, they don't do it just to see you roll a hose 100 times. They do it because it's on the weekend, I think you said it was Sunday or whatever, they've now given you a time and a place to be, So now you're accountable, and now you have to plan your life, which you don't do as a young fella. So same at Kapooka, it gave me that, you had very strict timings. You had to meet very strict objectives. While some things seemed so silly, you'd forget to lock your locker, and you'd go out to lunch, and sure enough, your corporal would walk through, find it insecure, and completely strip it, throw it around the room, take your bayonet, and make a complete mess of it. And clearly there'd be repercussions, not just that, but formal repercussions post that. It wasn't just because your locker was unlocked. It was because if you did that on operations with a locker full of half a dozen weapons and explosives, you can only imagine what the enemy would do with that. So it all draws a link to somewhere. So those are those lessons I carried on through Kapooka, was that accountability.
Making your bed. And
and being the grey man.
Yes.
That's what I learnt very quick. Be the grey man. Don't stick your head above the pit. Just head down, bum up, get it done.
Don't complain, don't whinge.
Don't complain, don't whinge, and also don't go overboard. Don't be too cheerful about stuff, or they'll see that too.
Yeah. So, do you there's a term that they say? Was that the starting point of bleeding green? Like you were? Or did that come a little bit later?
I think in terms of the bleeding green and wanting to be Army, that started long before that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Right.
That was the Army Cadets.
Yeah, okay.
I was that kid that, it was in the Army Cadets. I took that very seriously. Yeah. That's what, that's again what I wanted to do. I found something that I both enjoyed and I felt like I was good at. And then I was green before I even joined the Army. Yeah. Right. So when I was at Kapooka, I was like, I'm already sort of bleeding, cyan, a little bit light green, and then by the time I left and certainly went full time, I was I don't think I ever went full green, but I definitely I was definitely green.
So do they so I know that you, with the full time guy, like when you go full time, you've got your initial training, like you do your Kapooka, and then you go off to your designated what your job title is, what you're going to do, and is it similar in the reserves, or how does it work in reserves? Like what? Because I know it's only reserves. You're not full time. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's similar concept, but just the way they get you through it is different. So, for example, Kapooka for a reservist, it did bounce around over the years. It went from 2 4-week blocks. So you do 4 weeks, you'd go back home, go back to your job, and then come back do another 4 weeks. I only did the 4 week. At that stage, they then went to a 6-week course. And it's too long for reservists to take leave, so they bumped it back to 4 weeks. So they got you through that, and it was a crash course versus a 12-week full-time course. And then you'd leave that and then go through your initial employment training as a reservist, and that was a similar concept. In that full-time, they just did it full-time. Yep. And a reservist, you did it part-time, and a much more watered-down version of that. So I think I did same again. That was 2-week blocks. Yeah, so I went to Pucka for 2 weeks. Then came back, and then they would schedule for the next module of your IETs for another 2 weeks.
What was Pucka like for you?
It was Pucka, yeah. Cold and hot and old and dusty and everything that comes with Pucka. But it was great. Like I said, I loved it. Loved the continuation training. But it was similar concept. Just that's why if you go full time immediately after joining the reserves, they almost always put you back through the whole continuum because you had a go at everything, but it's just too hard to try and map all the differences.
Yeah. So you come back from Kapooka and you finish school, and then where were you parading out of? Like where was the sort of home base, I guess, if is that what they call them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Home base.
That's where you're parading out of your unit. Yep. So originally it was Holsworthy. Yep. So again I grew up in the Highlands, so it was a sort of good 45-minute trip. Out of Holsworthy Barracks here in Sydney, and then the squadron then moved out of there back to Parramatta, where its headquarters is. So then I started parading out of Parramatta.
Geez, that would have been getting you. I'm thinking, did you have your P's at that stage, or were you still on your L's?
Yeah, so the first little while it was L's.
Yeah, right. So, good hours, mate.
Going
up and down.
Yeah, my parents, God bless them, they would drop me to Holsworthy or drop me to Parramatta and hang around while I did. I think it was 3 hours or whatever on a Tuesday night. Yep. Yeah, and then back home again, and then eventually got my P so I could do that myself.
It's funny, isn't it, mate? When we look at the sacrifices that our parents made for us back in
crazy.
back in the day, and like you sit there and like I remember like I played soccer and my parents would come to training and stand in the cold and watch us and give up their hours of they could be doing something else, but they would come and watch and come and watch it on the weekends. And mate, it's funny, like as I've gotten older, I've realised, like I've got everything to thank my parents for. Like my life I have today is because of them and the sacrifices they've made. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay them, and I think you're the same. Like especially in the early days, like you just try and I guess at the end of the day, you're just trying to make your parents proud. And I think for you, I guess we like obviously your parents were supportive of what you were doing and the purpose, and because. Mate, there is a sense of pride. Like you've signed on the dotted line that you're representing your country. Like that's pretty cool. And yeah, like that's real. And then obviously you get your P's, and then your parents they get their life back a little bit. And,
exactly.
And especially when you said you were one of six, so spreading their time out across, that's pretty good, mate.
Yeah,
like that's a really cool thing. And I guess for you. You're repaying now in what you do now, like because and the sense of purpose, like and the sense to, I called it in my book, mate, a willingness to serve. There's any veteran or any first responder that signs on the dotted line there's a willingness to serve. We all, there's a higher calling for us to give back. And I feel that it's something that is sort of lost these days in a sense, I love the sense to serve others, and I think the world would this is just my thoughts. The world would be a better place if people would serve more, and whether it's in a volunteer capacity or feeding the homeless, or there's just something about it that you know it yourself. You and every veteran or a first responder knows it as well, or anyone who serves in the church or whatever. It's just it warms your heart knowing that you're giving back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's 100%. You've hit the nail on the head. And if you did it for the money, you wouldn't be doing it. Like if for a lot of those jobs, which quite obviously the volunteers organisations, but in terms of a military context, you could be earning far more money sitting in an office somewhere. But that's not how you serve. That's not that. That sense of pride in giving back and that adventure, that's far more valuable than a price.
Absolutely. And I think too, the life lessons, mate, that you learn along the way. Like some of those life lessons, as you say, if you're sitting in an office, you can't you can't really
but you
learn.
don't know what you don't know as well.
No, that's right.
So it's just, from having parents that they know there's potential life lessons to be learned. You don't know that, but you do now, because we sit here and we talk about it and we reflect on what we learned. That again, bowling and rolling, that was a significant life lesson that you've still remembered. So, it's all those little nuggets along the way.
Absolutely, and they're at the time you don't think they're nuggets of gold, but they are. And absolutely, and so you do a few years in reserves, and what were you doing? Like you left school, obviously you graduated year 12, and then you had your reserve time, and so. Were you just doing as many days as you could, or like what was it looking like for you after high school?
Yeah, so graduated in 2007, and then went full time in 2009. So I spent the next 18 months, doing at minimum every day I could, and in that time, I did some other reserve courses as well. So I made sure I finished off all that initial training, then went on a patrol commander's course they called at the time, which basically is one of your subject courses to get promoted, and and then all the other extra activities that the Army put on, I tried to get on. At that stage, I was working in a bar and also still on that farm as well, just smashing that out. And then it was only in I think it was start of 2009, what a good mate of mine at the regiment, he was a reservist as well, and he said, "Mate, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm having fun, enjoying what do you mean?" He said, "You know what you need to do. You need to go full time." And so that was, I guess, the push. I was like, "Yeah, you know what? You're right. I know I want to do that, and I guess this is the time to do it." And that's where I transferred full time.
And was that because I've spoken to a few veterans where they've gone choco to full time, and was that process slow or was it pretty quick for you?
It was. It's hard to sort of remember back then, but 6 months or so rings a bell. It wasn't because I was going or staying within the Corps. I think it helped as well. I know that if you're transferring to another Corps and going full time, or if you're going to another service and going full time, and into a job that's not yet available, and there can be a number of different factors which slow down that process. But I feel like for me, it was something around 6 months, which is pretty happy to.
And did you have to go back to Kapooka and do basic again, or
No,
did you?
yeah.
No, so you were one of the lucky ones that you didn't have to go back and do it again.
Yeah, well, thankfully by that stage I'd sort of been a reservist for about 3 years, and I think don't quite. It's probably case by case, but because I not only finished Kapooka, but I'd done all my initial employment training as a reservist, I think that was the cutoff. So if you were a reservist that had completed your initial training, well, not your basic training, but then your initial training, your specialist training, then that wasn't a requirement to then repeat basic training. So it was basically from there I then ended up in September of 2009, I think it was, on a bus to Puckapunyal to start on the ASLAV.
So you mentioned the ASLAV. So you joined and you went into the ASLAVs, and what did you have to learn about the ASLAVs that were different from what you were doing in reserve sense?
So a lot of what I'd done so it wasn't specifically ASLAV as such. It was towards the end. So as an ASLAV crewman, you were dual-hatted as a Cav Scout as well. So you not only went there just to learn the vehicle, you went so I was there for about 6 months, and the first 3 months of that, you never even saw the vehicle. It was all going through all the weapons again, most of which I was already qualified on, but just always happy to do it again. Yeah, I was like, it's a different context, it's a different employment of that system. So yeah, went all through that again, and then spent a bit of time out field and just getting all the remembering that all these other people I was there with had just come out of Kapooka, so they had only very minimal exposure to all this stuff. So we spent a lot of time, establishing the foundation skills, and then after the 3 months that's where really that learning started to pick up for me, and that's when we got hands on with the vehicle. Yeah,
right. And what was your time like? Like obviously you mentioned that you going through the weapons. Was it this is good, like this is cool now, I'm full time, this is where I want to be? And did you have a bit of, like, obviously you mentioned that you've been in for 3 years as a reservist, but did you have was there a bit of learning that you needed to get yourself to a level as well now that you'd gone full time, or?
No, I felt pretty confident at that stage again because I'd been in for some time, and these people were just out of Kapooka. So no, I felt like I was probably well on track for where I needed to be with the rest of the cohort. Thankfully, I was on there with a couple of other Army reservists actually that had gone full time. So we're all sort of on the same page in that regard, and no, it was a pretty seamless sort of integration in the course.
So where were you posted after Pucka? Where did you end up?
I went to 2CAV in Darwin.
And what was the main reason? Because the cavalry regiment, is it small with the where they're based, or how's it work? Yeah,
so back then there was a Cav regiment in Darwin and one in Townsville. Yeah, okay. And they were at the time we were deploying heavily to the Middle East, so they were constantly in and out. And typically within a regiment you have 3 squadrons, and then three sort of troops within a squadron and 3 sections within that. It's typically the rules are 3. And then so the ASLAVs were split between Darwin and Second 14 in Brisbane. But when I said before, Townsville and Darwin, so we had another M113 regiment in Townsville. But the other LAV squadron was regiment, I should say, is in Brisbane. Yep. And
what made you go Darwin? Was it because location-wise, it's it's hot and humid, and what made you choose Darwin and not Brisbane or North Queensland?
Yeah, so I've mentioned this before, and thankfully I didn't get too much negative feedback from putting it this way, but basically I was told by my instructors that you either go to Darwin for the job or you go to Brisbane for the location. And that's no reflection on the actual units themselves. It just so happened, for whatever reason, that one brigade who looked after Darwin and two Cav were far more busy in terms of rotating through overseas. They were extremely busy regiment. So I wanted to get overseas. I wanted to get on with the job. I wanted to get stuck into it. So I had no dramas. And again, as a young fellow, I didn't care much about anything else at that stage. Then the job. Where for others that were a little bit older and perhaps had families and stuff, their preference was more that sort of Brisbane environment. But each their own.
Because at that stage, you're still a young dig, as they say. And because what were you? How old were you when you went full time?
I was would have been 19 or 20.
Right. Yeah. So no responsibility, just you know, like mum and dad at home and brothers and sisters. But no. Yeah, so I can see why. Yeah, let's go, let's get this. And for you, was it once you were in? Was it everything you imagined it to be when you went like from reserves to full time? Was it everything that you thought? Hey, yeah, this is cool. This is where I want to be. Or
yeah. Again, I think looking back to what I just said on Kapooka as well when I first turned up there, it was challenging. It was tough, but it was exactly what I wanted it to be. It was I still have distinct memories of walking from the accommodation to where all the labs were to crack on for your course for the day and just thinking this is incredible. Like, what am I doing? This is amazing. As a young fella, I'm about to drive this this 14-ton killing machine and
half a $1,000,000 or
I would have been something like that, but it was just it was incredible. So loved it. It wasn't without its challenges, but that was all part of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was it like when you finally got to Darwin? How did the new guys? How did they, or you get into the battalion and it's battalion? That's battalion, is
regiment,
it? Regiment, you get into the regiment and squadron, or So learning the military as I go along, mate. So
so that's infantry and a lot of other units. Yeah, armoured's a bit different. We sort of almost adopt that sort of aviation. Sort of context of the regiment and squadron and troops and stuff like that.
So you get into is troop like basically like a platoon?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's break it down. Yeah, okay. Yep. So you get to the regiment, and how was the reception there with the regiment, and then how was the reception when you got into the troop?
It was pretty good. You heard some horror stories from back in the day where you sort of you were really introduced to the unit, but no, it was good. You were sort of given the benefit of the doubt as you got there. It was sort of like, you've got to prove yourself. You've got to build that trust, but they gave you that benefit at the start. It's like, well, until you prove us wrong, we'll let you, show us what you're worth. So it was a great environment. I went back into that Cav Scout role for about a year, I think it was, which is typically what everyone did. Just so again, you learnt the unit, you learnt armoured manoeuvre, and did your time. And then within the troop, it was great. It's like, it wasn't too dissimilar to any workplace, I think, or any sort of pretty stern workplace, in that you've got to sort of introduce yourself. You've got to make the time to understand people and learn people, and which I completely understood.
So, for people who aren't aware, can you explain to the listeners what the different roles are, and in there, like when you got to your troop, like obviously there's a driver, and then like how does it work?
So there's generally a pretty clear progression. That is, you start as a Cav Scout, again, understanding how it all works, a manoeuvre. You're riding around at the back of the ASLAB, so you're already starting to sort of understand how they move and what the driver's doing and their commitments. And then once you did that for a while, you then got sort of offered or selected or moved into a driver's position. And as a Cav Scout, you were qualified. Your whole course, you were qualified to drive the thing, but you didn't until you picked up a driver's job. And then you would move into the driver's position. And then you do that for however long they sort of thought necessary to then put you on a gunner's course. So then you became a gunner within the LAV. There's a few different variants of the ASLAV. There's ambulance, there's command, and there's typically what we call the gun car. So it's like the baby tank. It's got a 25mm cannon on it. And then once you did that for long enough, you then were put on your crew commander's course to then command the vehicle. And all that typically depends on your experience and how good you were, but that could take anywhere from 5 years to sort of 10 years progression. But yeah, so crew of 3 in the ASLAV, and then you might have sort of half a dozen Cav Scouts in the back of a PC, a troop carrying variant.
And you've done all three. You've done all 3 roles, and each has their own challenge. But for you, what's the most rewarding part of the 3 roles that you've had in the ASLAVs? For you, what stands out the most?
Oh, it'd be definitely commanding for sure. I think probably being a gunner is the most fun for obvious reasons. But as a driver, it's a great spot. It's a hell of a lot of fun driving those things, but there's a lot of servicing required. You're basically a very basic mechanic. You spend a bit of time learning the servicing of the vehicle, so you're constantly greasing, constantly checking levels. You're always working on the vehicle. If you're not driving it, you're working on it or you're sleeping. So that's a very busy role, but as you can imagine, it's the most junior of the vehicle, so you might also be making lunch for the crew and dinner and whatever meals or putting on the kettle. And then the gunner is no longer the driver, obviously, so they get a bit of a power trip sometimes and think, that's your job now, not mine. And the gunner's the same thing. If you're not manoeuvring the turret or firing the weapon, you're also servicing the gun, make sure it's good to go, loading it. But that's probably the best position. All the fun, no responsibility. Yep. And then the crew commander for me was the most rewarding, but it is quite obviously the most challenging of the roles. Yep. Now you're empowered with the vehicle and the crew that's in it and the people in the back of it, and also manoeuvring. You're seeing more about the strategic and tactical picture. Yep. But yeah, absolutely, it was the commanding.
I think too, it's a key point that you touch on too is the responsibility aspect of it. It's very similar to being in the fire brigade as well, being the driver and the crew leader. It's when you're driving, like, you're responsible to get them there safely to that, and it's fun. You can't switch off when you're responding. You've got to be on, and it's. I'm guessing it'd be exactly the same aspect as when you're driving the ASLAV. Same thing. Like you've got to pick your route of where you're going to go, and especially over in Afghanistan, IEDs and all that sort of thing. So you've got to pick the way you're driving, and so it could be a very I find sometimes it can be a stressful role as well. Not just being the crew, like the crew leader or crew commander like you were. But just being a driver too can be just as stressful as being, in charge. So. Oh yeah,
it's probably it's the most junior position, but probably the most important. Unless we start receiving, rounds at us, where the gunner sort of takes over a bit. But as a driver, you're on the whole time, and you've got a huge vehicle that could roll if you don't handle it properly, or you cut a corner, you bust one of the wheels or something like that, and it becomes an issue. So you were certainly rewarded with a good driver. If you had a good driver, it made your life so much easier. If you had a terrible driver, and that's not a matter of you might know a friend or family member that's a terrible driver on the road, but with our drivers as a commander, you tell them absolutely everything. If it's tight terrain, you're literally telling them when and where to turn. There's very specific language you use to do that. But yeah, it's an intense job for a young dig.
Absolutely. And so you obviously get into the troop, you start getting used to regiment life, all that sort of stuff. And then you get the news that you were deploying to Iraq. Can you tell us how this come about and what happened when you were just before you were about to go to Iraq?
Yeah. So this was all happened very quick. So it was within the same year. So I got to finish. As I said, went to Pucker in 2009, and then finished that in 2010. So I got to the regiment within 2010. I think it was May or April. And then went into that Cav Scout role for a few months, and then did well in that. And then as a result of that, I got there was a spot offered to head to Iraq, so I got offered it, and they said, you're doing well, so want to go to Iraq. And so I then left my troop and then went over into the squadron that was deploying and got the introduction into there and started training for a few months. And then, long story short with that one was, you're not on the plane until you're on the plane. And we trained pretty solid for about 3 or 4 months. And then we're told that, about a week out from the trip that the position we're going over to fill, which was the embassy sort of protection team in Baghdad, was filled by civvy contractors. They didn't want military to do it anymore. It was paid civvy security. And then, so all that got knocked off the perch real easy, and went back to the other unit that I was in.
And what was that like for you of, getting told that you're going, you're gonna get a Guernsey, here we go, we're gonna go, and then you get told, no, you're not going, and like I'm guessing deflation, not, it was terrible. And how did you regroup, and did you fear that you'd, because I know some units just never got a chance to deploy them, was it the FOMO of fear of missing out? Like, did you think, oh no, I'm actually not gonna get a go here? And how was your family's reaction when you said, oh, I'm going, but then I'm not going? How were they?
Yeah, so I guess the first part is I don't think, it was still my first, I hadn't even done a year in the unit, and I was already at that stage already being deployed. So I think I still had that mentality of, well, I was lucky enough in the first place. Like, all the other people I came up with did not get on that trip. So I think, and at that stage it was 2010, it was the height of Afghanistan at that stage. So, and I saw, I'd been tracking for some time that units were coming and going, and speak to enough people around the unit, just about everyone had been over a number of times. So I thought, well, that's okay, but it's a matter of time. I knew it was. I guess I didn't fear that I was going to miss out, because I knew it was going to happen. In terms of the family, they were pretty devastated at first for knowing that I was going to Iraq, after I'd reassured them that Iraq was the safer of the two options, so don't worry about it. Yep. And then told them I wasn't going. They were pretty excited until what happened next.
Yeah, which we'll get into now. So in 2010, you got the news that you would in fact be deploying to Afghanistan, and your family's worst fears were brought into fruition. And this, can you explain to people, this sort of happened so quick that you, wasn't normal. How was your pre-deployment training?
Yeah. So typically you would do, anywhere up to 6 months of pre-deployment training in preparation to go into a campaign or theatre. And so the unit, the squadron that was going had been doing that already for some months. So I think by this stage it was about, October, that had got off the Iraq trip and then got put into a random troop that wasn't deploying. And then, come November, I got a call from my previous boss who got put on that trip, and he basically said, what are you doing? I said, just sort of picking up my show bag and putting all the lollies back in it and trying to get on with work. And he said, how do you feel like going to Afghanistan? I said, put me on, coach, let's do it. I'm keen, put me on. I said, when should I, when do I start training? He said, you've already done your training. I said, you're leaving in 10 days. So 6 months of training, and all the training I did for Iraq was very, very different. I was in armoured SUVs, so armoured, Land Cruisers and Chevy Suburbans, and it was a domestic sort of personal protection and executive protection type of job. And now I'm going in an armoured vehicle, fighting at long range, long distance. So I basically skipped all that training, which is good. But thankfully I went over as a driver and then a little bit later as a gunner through the trip. So, I was always going to be mentored. I probably wouldn't have done it as a crew commander because, I wasn't qualified as a crew commander by then, but to not have done that training and then to be thrown into theatre would probably be a little bit negligent. But Then ended up on that trip and
So what was obviously getting thrown into the deep end? Like at that stage, you were 20, 21 at that stage?
21, yeah.
Yeah, right. So still young, but I guess bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. Yep, let's just go. Yep, I'm getting my Guernsey. Here we go. What was it? Obviously, how did your family take it that you were like, oh, by the way, I am deploying now, and I'm going to the dreaded Afghanistan.
Yeah, and like I said, at that stage, it was pretty well the height of it. So I think we lost a couple of dudes in August of that year. So a month or two before I got reassigned, so I managed in that 10 days to quickly get some leave to head back home and catch up with family and break the news. And it wasn't handled well. I don't think I've ever seen my family particularly my parents at that stage and my grandmother, who happened to be there at the time, in that state. I certainly haven't seen him in that state since. And it's moments like that as a young fella, all you wanted, and it's, you read books, you hear the stories of the World War I and II diggers who somewhat, from what I can ascertain, felt the same. They wanted an adventure. They wanted to get over there, and they heard all these stories about this adventure, right? And they'd always trained for the big fight, and they finally got it. But you very rarely ever hear them talk about, their impact or the consideration for family. And at that stage, as you can tell, like it was just all about wanting to get in and do the job and wanting to get on with it and wanting to do it. Yeah, to do all the high risk stuff and all the crazy stuff as any young fella wanted to do. And it was only until that moment, being face to face with the family, thinking, I've probably said something stupid like, oh, yeah, it's going to be really fun. I'll just drive around the streets in my armoured vehicle, and if we find some baddies, whatever, we'll just do what we've got to do. And to them, like, they're like that. They obviously have life experience backing them, that they've dealt with risk their whole lives and learnt how to, to steer away from the things that are going to make you, potentially do you harm. Whereas a young fella hadn't learnt that. That part of my brain hadn't developed yet. So I was very ignorant in terms of just saying, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. And to them, they were much smarter than that. And I can only imagine as a parent, you're like, shit, am I going to see him again? Like, you just don't know.
Well, I mean, you're a parent now, and it's you. I guess your priorities have changed over the years.
Absolutely.
And later on down the track, like I can see, like you can see it now being a parent, what your parents were thinking yourself, and I think I get it too. Like when you're in the heat of the moment, you're in the heat of the battle. You're not thinking that. You're just thinking about the job. Like you're like, all right, this is what's in front of me. This is what I need to do. I've done my training, and I just need to get this done. Like, and then sort of worry about the consequences later. Like it's sort of, and I think every person's like that. I think and like you said, you've trained so hard for this. You want to be, you want your go. Like you want to go over and represent your country, but you want to be with your mates and I think for you at that time, this was what you saw on the TV all those years before. This was you going, I've got my purpose, and I'm going over to And I think looking back now, and I'll ask you this: it was, had you thought of, I might die over there, and I'm okay with it. Like, did that thought go through your head, or was that something that you've only looked back on later on now after you've been over to Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think it's whether at that stage again it just wasn't a that part of my brain hadn't developed that you think, well, I was recognising those people on the TV, or not in terms of personally, but I was recognising the fact that there is someone that's been killed on the TV. I was like, oh, okay, that's a guy that died, going to where I'm going. But I never thought, that's a guy that's died. What if that's me? That could be me. I don't think I recall ever sort of thinking that. I did have moments of thinking, well, okay, geez, it's there's a few more names now than what I've seen over the past couple of years, so it's obviously pretty busy. So we need to get into it. But yeah, I can't ever recall sort of thinking that could be me. I think I'm pretty sure I did at the time say this, or at least I have for some years after that. I thought, and very, very cold-hearted and callous, even with a couple of buddies I lost over there while we were there. It's I don't necessarily feel sad for that. I never thought that, even for me, I thought, oh, I mean, I don't know. For them, it was. I just thought, well, you died doing what you wanted to be doing. It's unfortunate, absolutely, but I feel for your family more than you. So Godspeed, mate. Like, thanks for all you did. So I was very, very reluctant to get caught up in anything too deep or emotional with it. It just wasn't a side of me, I think, back then. It was probably self-preservation subconsciously. It's only till I look back now and go, and that's probably where a lot of people might have issues, later as you develop more and you assess risk differently as you go on. I look back at some of the things I did and said, shit, that absolutely could have been my last. Like, that some of the stuff I did, I exposed myself to so much more risk than what was necessary at the time. Not because it was, I had to, it's because I chose to, in that moment, to do something that I did not absolutely need to do. But that, I can always hang my hat on the fact that as a young fella, you just don't have, you can have all the training in the world, and that will help you, but there's still a lot of stuff.
Life experience too, and I guess maturity as well, like if you're that little bit, but in saying that, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and if you had that little bit more maturity, maybe you might have second guessed of what you did as a young fella, that might have put you in the more risk, and you may not have come, so it's maybe having that sort of gung-ho sort of attitude. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, that not having the gung-ho, like you did what you did, but it's that, being that little bit older, that might have actually been, it could have been your undoing. So,
Yeah, I think it, and as well, at the end of the day, if everyone, was completely risk adverse and wanted to, and just didn't want to expose themselves to anything, well then you'd never get anything done. It sounds unfortunate, it is, but at the end of the day, an army is an army. You will be exposed to risks, and you need to be happy with that. You need to accept that. You need to mitigate that risk as best as you can, but you can't, otherwise you'd never leave the wire.
Yeah, and it's sort of in life too. Like you can't sit in cotton wool and say I'm never going to cross the road because a bus might hit me or a car or something. You don't know what you don't know, and I sort of like you strike me as a guy, James, that is someone that just lives life to the fullest. And if your time's up, your time's up. Yeah. That's it. Like you can't change it. It's that's your time, and you've just got to be comfortable that I think people they fear death, and it's sort of something that I guess you've got to get comfortable with, because it's going to happen to you anyway. Like, it's whether it's now or in 60 years time or whatever it is, it's going to happen. Like, it's just that's the circle of life, and that's just at that time you were okay. But I'm doing my job. This is what I'm here to do, and so. Tell us what it was like when you first got into country, and what was it like the first time you were outside the wire, and was it like, all right, I'm in a war zone now, this shit's real, like, or what was that like?
Yeah, I think it's just one saying I'll bring up that I sort of like to live by, and that is that a boat in a harbour is its safest place to be, but that's not what a boat's designed to do, right? A big ship, it's designed to get out in the open water and do its job. So yeah, you can have that boat and you can have it tied up in the wharf for the rest of your life. That is your life, and that's fine. For a lot of people, that's 100%. That's what they want to do, and that's what makes them excited. But for me, I want to get that boat and I want to smack it out to sea. I want to find the biggest storm and ride it out. And that's not to say I'm a loose cannon. No, things have changed now, but I get the same now with what I do a lot in helicopters. Right, a lot of people look at it, and every time it seems to be every second week there's an accident somewhere. In a helicopter accident, and some people, a lot of people, they're like, I just will not get in a helicopter, I will not fly. And sure, I get that there's a risk there, and hey, it could be me that is in the next accident. Touch wood, hope it's not. Yeah. But I'm very, very logical about this sort of stuff too, and I look into things, and it's about 95% of aviation accidents are human error. So I just need to make sure that I'm in a position that I am good. I'm not worried about the machine or anyone else. I just have to have confidence in myself to know that my training will get me through. And that was the same in the military and same in anything that I do, firefighting, anything. It's not about, I could be the next overrun, or it could be, I need to have confidence to make sure I'm not in that position in the first place. So it's not about worrying about the people around me. It's I need to invest in myself. So getting in the country, it was finally boots on the ground. I was like, okay, I've not been removed off this trip. I'm actually here. It's happening. So the responsibility and the accountability grows exponentially. You go from being in Australia domestically, incredibly controlled in terms of weapons and munitions and everything you have. And when you're on the range, it's very controlled. You're loading up your live ammunition and you fire it and you empty it at the same point. You never wander around with it. Now in Afghanistan, I'm off the plane. I've got 2 grenades in my pouch. I've got 6 magazines of ammunition. I've got all my body armor. I'm wearing it. I'm all dialed up. And they're just like, yep, there's your room. There's your vehicle over there. Just make sure you've got 1,000 rounds of high explosive ammunition in it. Make sure you've got your 84mm rockets all stacked and good to go if you need them. It's like, wow, that for me was the biggest transition there. And I think if you ask most veterans, probably what they really one of the huge things they got out of their probably deployment is that sense of responsibility. Now, you're going from a complete controlled environment to now you're in your space. You're not completely controlled anymore. You don't have all those laws and policies that are governing, all that stuff we did back home. But now that you were playing that game now, so shit was real.
And what for you? Did you go off? Did you go over with MTF2? Was it so? For people who aren't aware, was that the mentoring and reconstruction team, or what was your role of MTF2? What was that?
Yeah, so I went through a few different iterations over the years, but yeah. So mine was the mentoring task force too, and our role as a nation was to primarily mentor local nationals, both police and army, to basically look after their own country. However, at that stage, we were still building patrol bases. So that was a collective role. And that was the motivation was to, we're always working with the Afghan National Army or the police force and mentoring them. But our role was slightly different in that my specific role was FPG, the Force Protection Group. So our role was to protect the people doing the mentoring, to avoid things like, green on blues, which is, unfortunately happened a number of times where we would have Afghan, either police or army would turn against our own soldiers. So our role was to both protect them, but also protect anyone from obviously the Taliban out in the Badlands. So we did a lot of convoy escorts out to these patrol bases. So not everything was done by air. A lot of it was done by road, and just standard mail runs, food runs, and moving people out to these bases. But also we spent a number of occasions building new patrol bases. So it was our role to then go out into uncharted sort of territory, set up cordons, and we're talking, tens of square kilometre cordons, i.e. we're patrolling that area whilst a base is being built. And then once the base was built, we would collapse back and go to our other roles or venture on to the next area to protect the engineers while they built a new base.
So how long was it? So when you were going out to those patrol bases, like were you out for weeks at a time, or how long was it actually were you outside the wire for?
Yeah, so doing those convoy escorts, it might be a few days, maybe up to a week, depending on which base it was. Some of those patrol base builds took weeks. So I think longest I was out was for 6 weeks, and that was living out of the vehicle for that time. But most of the others were about 3 weeks. We did one big trip from Tarank out to Kabul via Kandahar, so quite a big road trip, and that was about a month on its own.
Yeah, right. And did you, obviously a lot of isolation, so you guys could only really rely on each other out there, and obviously you had a few contacts, and what was that like the first time you got into contact with the enemy?
Yeah. It had been some time, so it'd probably been there. Well, having said that, the first few nights that we were in Tarank out, we got rocketed quite a fair bit. So it was my first introduction. That was laying in bed thinking, I can hear my alarm going off, but I hadn't set an alarm. and I heard an explosion and realised that it was the what they call the CRAM, the counter rockets and munitions radar, had detected munitions flying into the area, and it sends off an alarm. So that was my first intro, thinking, okay, well, I guess we're here. But then the first engagement outside the wire was it was pretty chaotic. It was a first for most of us on that trip at least, and it was also out. We'd just set up an overwatch position on a convoy escort to move some construction materials out to a new build site, and it's a bit like some of the movies. I think I recall seeing it in some movies where they'll just be standing around and you see the dust around you just kick up. You're thinking, that's a bit weird. What the hell is that? And then a few seconds later, the sound actually catches up because it was quite a long distance engagement. And then you hear the cracks of the rounds. And then you realise all of a sudden what's happening. So you're straight to the positions you needed to be, up in the turret, on the gun, or any various positions. And engaging and eliminating if required that threat.
So obviously with the ASLAV you've got your gunner,
yep.
And so do you at that point you driver and all that sort of thing, do you just go for your main weapon, or is there a certain way that you guys all obviously talk to each other and go, right, we know what we've got to do, and you just get on your weapon, or how's it work?
Yeah, so it depends on the what you're doing at the time. But say if you're a driver having lunch or whatever and you get engaged, then if you're not doing anything else, your first and more often than not your primary role is to get back in your vehicle, get in the hole, close up. So close all your hatches and start up on command from the crew commander, because if we have to employ the weapon at this stage, if the engine's off, it's purely battery powered. But if we're going to start using it, it's going to start chewing the power, or we might need to move or engage or do what we have to do. So, but some of the times the crew, you're rotating through that gunner's position. So if you're stopped for again that 3 weeks and you're sitting on an overwatch position just monitoring patterns of life or trying to find certain high value targets, then you'll all rotate through that gunner's position. So I got a bit of a crash course on the gun. I'm not a qualified gunner at that stage, so I was just taught how to employ it. We also had we had two Mag 58s, so two 7.62mm machine guns, as well as the main gun, the 25mm cannon. So if I'm the driver at the time in the turret, well then I'm going to return fire and I'm going to use that system until my gunner gets into a position where they can take over, and then I go to the driver's hole. And then the commander's doing the same thing, jumping in, firing up the comms and trying to coordinate what the next manoeuvre is. Yeah,
right. And obviously at that stage, the IED threat was very high at that and very prevalent at that stage, where that they had a lot of injuries and deaths because of IEDs. You had a few close calls with IEDs while you're out outside the wire?
Yeah. So over the about the 6 month trip that we're outside, we hit 5 in total. Yeah. Yep. Thankfully I didn't hit any of them. Yeah. But yeah, funnily enough, 3 of those went off behind me. So I'd already driven over them or past them and managed to miss them for whatever reason, and they'd gone off behind me. Thankfully on vehicles that are far more capable of withstanding an IED than the ASLAV was. We did have one guy, Poppy Pierce, killed a number of years earlier in an ASLAV after he drove over an IED, which, the ASLAV was not built for this type of warfare. It was not built for IEDs. No, basically nothing we had back then was built for this type of warfare. It was built for what they say, the war, not a war.
So very different to the Bushmasters.
The Bushmasters, which are basically primarily built to withstand both mines and IEDs. The monocoque sort of boat-shaped hull assisted in deflecting any explosions from beneath the vehicle outwards. So it did a very good job of withstanding IEDs. But ASLAV not so much.
And that obviously while you're over in country, you mentioned earlier that you'd lost a few guys and you had a few wounded in action. How hard was that being in country? Like you'd seen it many years on the TV, but actually being there, what was that like? And obviously, I'm guessing you would have attended a few ramp ceremonies. And What was that like losing, and what was that like for morale at TK when that happened, when you lost guys over there?
Yeah, so that was probably the first intro to it. I think I'd probably been there a week or two in Tarrant Cout, and yeah, we just had they had sirens all around the base, or speakers, and we were just told that over the PA that there was a ramp service that afternoon, and unfortunately for the Yanks, who were we were co-located there with the Yanks and Slovakians and some Dutch at that stage. Most had pulled out, but that they were all part of that process too. So I went to a couple of ramp services for American soldiers. And I suppose that's where it hit. Was like, shit. Actually, this is I'm going out patrol next week, and that's where these guys are coming back in from. So yeah, that they were difficult. That's probably where, unlike before, I saw it on the TV and thanks for your service, bud. Where that's like, oh shit, actually seeing it now, and not that it hit me hard. I'll say that it probably didn't hit me hard, but it was like, oh okay, this is real. Like this is actual.
It's not. This isn't a game anymore. This is this is for real.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Yeah. And then and we probably experience the same as first responders when you come across a body for whatever reason, or it's in isolation. I tend to deal with that really well, but when there's a body and a family or bystanders that don't even know the person, you see their reaction, that's where it changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's same for ramp services, for example. I'm like, I think I'm 6 foot tall and bulletproof, and then I thought, oh yeah, thanks for your service, dig. And then I look at the hundreds of people that are saluting, lining the road, and carrying this person onto a plane. You think, oh shit, actually, all these other people are affected. Why aren't I affected? I think now I'm affected, and then it starts. But yeah, and then outside the white was a very different situation. Yeah, like I said, a couple of the ticks, the troops in contact we had, had two of our guys. Well, one of our guys, Jamie Larkin, was killed, and our interpreter was killed in the same contact. But he was basically thrown onto a Black Hawk, a medevac Black Hawk, and flown back to base, and we stayed in the fight and stayed there for another, I think it was 3 weeks in that environment. So that was our ramp service. Was loading him, the guys loading him onto a Black Hawk in contact and sending him off, and it was everyone else that was back at the base. I guess they got the PA call, ramp service, and they all went to it, and that was sort of our closure, really, in that instance.
So did you guys, when Jamie was killed, did that uniform is more to come together and be and have a tighter bond and at that stage, or? Yeah,
I'd say so. It absolutely brings people together, if nothing in just in grieving and mourning. So it was probably another few days before we all that our group caught up outside the wire, because we were all still separated in our own little patrol areas, where we could come together and sort of debrief it. And sort of have our own send off, which involved things like, we had a heap of expired and not expired illumination rockets, so we put a few of those up at midnight one of the days there, and so we did a few little things like that to send him off. But yeah, it absolutely does.
And protocol, like obviously, like your parents are back here, they're hearing another Australian soldier's being killed, and it goes comms blackout, and you can't, and obviously outside the wire you can't contact your family. So at some point you actually got back and said, no, I'm okay, I'm alive. How hard was that for you, like knowing that you couldn't contact your family, just to say, no, I'm okay, it's not me? Like, what was that like?
You know what? I'm probably not ashamed to say that it probably wasn't on my mind. I lived two very different lives then, in terms of when I was on that trip. Good for me, probably bad. No, definitely bad for family. Is that was my life at the time, was that trip.
And I'm just going to stop you there for a sec, James. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because you're mission focused, and that's what you need to be.
Yeah, well, I think, like I said, for me, it's that that was good. Yeah, for them, probably not so good.
Yeah.
So a happy medium would be great. But for me, yeah, I think what was happening back home, not just family, but everything, the life I had back home, it didn't matter. It very obviously mattered, but at the time, my brain was wired that it wasn't even a consideration. That was my world. Was the blokes beside me were all I cared about that trip. The job was what mattered. Doing the job was the motivation. So that was the world I was living. It's not like you go on a holiday and you've got to get back and sort everything out. For me, I just didn't even consider it. That's the world I lived. And I think it was, absolutely great in terms of my own self-preservation and keeping mission focused and staying in it and not having potentially the dramas that maybe others would have if they maintained communication back home. And I did find having a lot of those phone calls back home that I didn't, I wouldn't mention any of that. I wouldn't go into detail. I knew that if it happened to me that they would know about it, so I, again, still had another 2 or 3 weeks before I could call family. Yeah. But I think we lost Richard Atkinson that month as well. So there were it was a busy month. And I guess whether I knew it or not, that they would have known that if they had that media blackout and they heard that there was an incident in Afghanistan, that they would know about it shortly thereafter. And I guess after a day or two, then they would go back to, just business as usual. And they always knew that I would call when I could. So when I got back, it was, we just finished a patrol and, it was business as usual. We just, delivered some packages, built a base. And anyway, how's home? How are you guys going?
Because you have to keep it, obviously, security. You couldn't go into detail of what you were doing fully. Like I understand, I get that concept that, short calls. Yeah, how's life back there? Yep, no, everything's good over here. So it was, and that probably would have been I guess in a sense of more asking what your family was doing back here than what you could say you were doing over there.
It was probably, it was definitely a consideration, right? Every call could and no doubt was monitored. So you had to be limited in terms of what information you were giving away. But for me, it was less about that and more about preservation of their feelings, their peace of mind. There's no way I could go into the depth of getting blown up or getting shot at or getting rocketed or losing 2 guys the week before or whatever. Absolutely not. So it's much safer just to say, oh no, it was unfortunate. There was it was an incident that happened, but we're all okay and we're trucking on. So that it was just a matter of their preservation. Absolutely.
Yeah, and because how long was your deployment for? What was
6 months?
6 months. Yeah. Okay. So initially, was it the 8 months, or was that? Did they shorten them, or why was yours only 6?
Yeah, because I was thrown on that sort of last minute. So I joined about a month into the existing trip. So they'd had already had a month ahead. And then the way you got pulled out of country, it wasn't all at once. You got staggered in and out. Yep. So some people got longer, some people got shorter. But originally the reason I got put on that trip in the first place was to replace a guy that got injured. And it was supposed to only be a short trip, and he was supposed to come good and go back into theatre. But that never ended up happening for whatever reason, and I guess he just didn't fully recover, and I ended up staying for that extended period of time to cover that. Yeah.
But necessarily not a good thing either for you, because you didn't get some leave that you were just solid 6 months straight over there, and a lot of the guys got leave and could go and have a crazy time, but you didn't have that luxury, and then you finish your time in Afghanistan and you came back to Australia, and obviously had your contacts and close calls and everything like that. And did you feel that when you got home you had changed as a person from what you were before you went over to Afghanistan? And was it? Did you feel that you had there was a part of you was sort of left over there, or what was that like coming back to Australia?
Yeah, I was a cocky little bugger. That's what I was. I thought I was a bloody war hero. Yeah, so I didn't immediately feel like I'd changed, as in that, I thought, God, now that I've done that, I'm much stronger, I'm more resilient, I'm whatever. I coming back was difficult in terms of, by that stage at the end of the trip, I was like, yeah, okay, I'm pretty keen to get home because, I said a few mates had already left and it was sort of, we weren't getting sent out as much because the new guys were in, and so we're sort of taking a bit of a back seat at that stage. So I was pretty keen to get home. I was home for about a week and I was like, I want to go back. Yeah, I needed to go back. There was actually a very minute chance of going back. My boss, who was still over there at the time, just remembering this now, I remember getting a message from him saying, for whatever reason, I can't remember, he said, if you could come back, would you? We might need you for another month or something. Anyway, that didn't end up happening, but I basically said, yeah, I'll go back. Coming back, it was, I first started to, know I was different as soon as I got back, actually, when my dad picked me up from the airport and we're driving home and he said, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? He said, you're basically sitting in the passenger seat and you're at 45 degrees facing out the side window. You're not looking at me, you're looking, and I was just, turned out, I was just looking and that was, as a driver, you're taught to always look down the next side street, always look in the gutter, always look ahead for the next threat, or the next ambush that's going to pop out, the next, shaped charge sitting in a wall about to fire at you. And I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, where were we? So it's just little things like that, going to restaurants and wanting to be the back of the corner, the back to the wall. And I feel that wasn't a, because I'm flipping out type of thing. That was more just me, because that's what I did. You always thought that was your security. It's it's whatever. You always go inside and you take your hat off, right? Or you take your sunnies off. That for me, it was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to sit in the corner because that's my training, subconsciously. And it was only until my I think I met a chick on one of my promotion courses that I went basically immediately on, and anyway, was with her about a year or something, and my mother met her, and it was only until this girlfriend at the time probably shouldn't have said it to me, but my mum said to her that I was not the same James, and so then I think it was during an argument or something. So my girlfriend said, "Oh, your mother said you weren't the same, and you're different." I thought, "Oh shit." So that was the time I thought, "Oh, maybe I have changed, and I just don't know it." And of course, you don't know what you don't know, and yeah, clearly I had changed, and I wasn't the same. I think in my mother's words, it wasn't the same. Sort of baby James, like her little boy sort of thing. I wasn't the same cuddly type of guy, I guess. And yeah, definitely to answer your last sort of point to that was absolutely. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone unless they had a really terrible time in terms of got locked to a desk or something their whole trip. But yeah, I think everyone's left something behind. Yeah, you'll forever chase that next high, but yeah, there's definitely a piece of me back there, and I think that's why for years afterwards, while we were still deploying, I was like, I want to go back and find that piece. I need it.
Mm. Yeah. And but I think James, you're only human, mate. That you're only a human being by doing having that feeling. Like I think it's anything that like what you do now. Like it's pretty cool what you do now, and like that's the next high, which we'll get into in a minute. But it's. Yeah, you're only human, mate. Like that's a normal reaction to I want to be back over there with my mates. That's what I want to do, and it's hard not to change from what you'd seen in that in that 6 months that you were over there. Like that's anything to do with trauma. That's just it's the human way and the human brain of processing. Yeah, that's what it was.
It's really profound. It's hard. It's definitely hard for people to comprehend, because I've had this discussion with a few people, but it was both the worst experience and the best experience of my life, and I wouldn't trade it for any holiday you could ever offer me. And that's what people get. It's like, what I was living in a hole in the ground, after all that stuff that had happened, it was getting snowed on, freezing my ass off, eating out of plastic bags.
Good old ration pack.
Yeah, it's like I would not trade that life experience for any holiday you could ever give me. And it's the asshole of the world, and I wouldn't trade it for the Maldives. I don't care. I wouldn't. 6 months wherever. No way.
But I've heard, mate, it's, as everyone says, it stinks. The country stinks because because it's so cold over there, they dry their feces out and then burn their feces. So I've heard that from a few veterans, and it stinks. That's the first thoughts of when they come into country. It stinks. But they said for such a shithole of a place, and what's gone on, it's a beautiful country.
Oh yeah,
it's an absolutely beautiful. If they got their act together, it'd be it'd be great. Well, maybe not a great tourist spot, but
Well, it was, and unfortunately now, when I was there, I was seeing some old Caesar era constructions, old walls, and unfortunately post that trip when ISIS went through, they destroyed a lot of that history. But I was when I was in Kabul in the coalition mess there in the eating hall, and it was basically armoured shipping containers surrounded by sandbags and all armoured up, and on the wall of the shipping containers inside were pictures back from the 70s of this well-dressed Caucasian couple, perhaps American or Pommy or something, sitting in a vinyl record store in Kabul. With the locals standing there smiling away with them. And you walk outside your armoured, bomb-proof shipping container to see the main street of Kabul with most glass windows were shot out, burnt out wrecks of cars that were once a suicide vehicle-borne IED, and the place is, but then you go back inside again, see these pictures, and you're like, wow, this was once a beautiful place. Yeah. Very,
sort of, I guess, in a sense, mate, for you, come back to Australia and see how lucky we are in this country.
Oh, yeah.
Like we've got nothing to, we've got nothing to complain about. Like, we're not born into a war zone where, we've pretty well got all the freedom in the world that we can live by and do whatever, to a point that's legal. Don't do illegal things, but we're very lucky in our where we live, and I guess it makes you not take for granted what you've got back here, and that lived experience of where you've been. Like you can see that now and go, yeah, that was, you wouldn't trade it for anything, but it was like there's chasing that next high. I understand, I get it. Like it's a couple of my friends went over as well, and they just come back and just were chasing the high of like riding their motorbikes at speed, and just like chasing that next thrill rush, and it's like, whoa, as we were looking, going, ooh, what's going on, like, but it's exactly right, mate. You wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a good time.
They always say that when you should always, when you do something, throw yourself at it, focus and just 100% let it consume you, and do really well at it and give it your all. No one ever talks about the repercussions of doing that. Whilst I agree with that concept in 99.9% of things you do in life, as I spoke about before, when that trip became my life, it was great for the mission context. It was great for performance. It was great for self-preservation and the preservation of my family. But the problem is when you invest yourself so much in something, you leave something behind when you don't have it anymore. And B, that's the problem, you chase that next high. You invest so much heavily in it that you have to be very careful that when it gets taken away, how are you going to deal with that? When you can no longer do it, that's what a lot of veterans and first responders have issues with, is that when they do something and they love it so much, that's why generally people that don't enjoy their jobs or do it for the money or, go on the trip because, they just want to be gung-ho, they don't often have issues because that's all it is to them. Where those that invest so much into whatever it is that they do in life, whether it's, family or you own a bloody hair salon or whatever, and the same applies to them. You live, you breathe it, you invest your whole life into it. What happens when your salon goes bankrupt? Those people do not do well. Right? So all I'd say is be very careful how much you invest of yourself in something, because you will lose it when it goes.
And so you come back from your trip on an absolute high, and where do you go after that? Do you go back to the troop, and what was next for you after the trip?
Yeah. So I went. Yeah. Long story short, spent that week of decompression or whatever, and then went on leave for a bit. Then went back to the unit, and I think it was only about a month, maybe two, that when we went on an exercise outfield for 6 weeks. And that was a big turning point for me. So I was outfield again. Distinctly remember this warrant officer that hadn't been to the Middle East and clearly thought he should have, and he didn't. But he said to me, you are to forget about everything you've learnt over there. We are training for the war, not a war. And we went back to fighting the Khmer Rouge, this imaginary force that may or may not resemble an oppressor in Southeast Asia, training for the Brisbane Line, and fighting out in the middle of the Northern Territory, thinking that's where the battle was going to happen. Absolutely, that's super important. But it was not. I just trained and lived and breathed this for the whole last year, and to have that happen, and then now fire blanks and going back to everything I said before about, no, you can't have that ammunition, you can't have this, you can't have that, we don't trust you with that. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I've just done this for real for 6 months, where life and death, I can see that there would have been a bit of anger and a bit of and at that stage, had he deployed before, or he hadn't deployed? Yeah, and you're going, mate, you're just assuming what it's like over there, and I've actually lived it for real. I can see why you'd be a bit, hot under the collar, and was that another learning experience for you and challenging of, all right, I've just got to suck it up and do what he says, and even though I know this isn't the way they do it, or what was that like for you? Yeah,
definitely. I think to be clear, like that training that we were doing is absolutely fundamental. It's the foundations of everything. If you can train for the war and then adapt to fight another war, that's great. But to go the other way, I absolutely recognise what he's saying, and that is that that was a trip over there in the sandpit that you did, and there's a much bigger world out there than just that. So you need to adapt, to say that, to forget everything you've learned and change your ways and now relearn all this. I think that's probably a bit steep, but it was difficult. Knowing full well that that's not probably how it should be done. But I didn't feel like I needed to correct him. I just thought, okay, no, that makes sense. So I just I'll just get on with it. Yep. But I had a plan to move on from that point.
And then you do move on, and we'll talk about that now. So you moved on, you became an instructor down at Kapuka, and that's like full circle. What made you want to go back to Kapuka as an instructor, and you didn't get away unscathed in Kapuka? If you can share with us, share us that little story of what happened.
Yeah, so... that was the catalyst. So for me, I always go into something with a plan or a checklist of what I want to achieve in that role, and I still have one today. So for the Army, I wanted to command my own ASLAV, I wanted to deploy, and I wanted to teach recruits. That were what I needed. That was my checklist. So I obviously deployed. Then I came back and did a bit of training and commanded my own LAV, and then thought, well, what's next? And that is to teach recruits. Then went down to Kapuka and started teaching there as what was that stage, young 23-year-old, I think it was, 24-year-old. So it wasn't without its challenges at first. Obviously, being a young 24-year-old straight back from the Middle East, I was young and cocky as all hell, and a Cav guy, which we didn't have the best reputation in the world when it came to females, I suppose. Excuse me.
I love it. I'm laughing with you.
Yeah. I'm just going to choose my words wisely. It's such a close environment. You build strong bonds, and I was down there, and typically what you do after you finish your recruit instructor course is you end up getting put in a platoon to observe how it's done, so you can obviously learn the ropes And I'd been incorporated into a platoon over the Christmas period, and the other corporal that I was sort of being mentored by, he gave me a lot of rein, and I had finished the instructor course, so he said, "Oh, here's something for you to teach. You can go and teach that with them, and I'll just watch them and whatnot." But it turned out that a couple of chain letters were getting around about this new corporal that had just, marched into their platoon that I think had been running for maybe a month already at that stage. So they'd already built pretty strong bonds between the recruits, between themselves. And yeah, this letter was left out on a desk of one of the recruits, and my platoon sergeant at the time found it, who, again, I hadn't known that well yet at this stage, and he's in fact the one that warned me about being this cav guy and this cockiness, and, if ain't cav, you ain't, and he had it out for me already, and found this letter that spoke about between two recruits that had said, "Oh, how's about the new corporal?" and and a number of other things that they went into. I spoke about in the letter, which I can't mention, but yeah, basically it was insinuating a lot of things, and it never mentioned my name, but it mentioned my rank, which I was a Lance Corporal at the time, not a full corporal, and at that stage it was very rare to have a Lance Corporal at Kapooka. I think it was probably the only one. So it was very clear it was me. They were smart with their language, not using my name, but yeah, it's just spoke about different little adventures that they thought. Anyway, and straight away, my platoon sergeant, pulled me out onto what they call the admin line, which is a painted line in the middle of the foyer that we would put recruits on to beach them about that locker that we just found it unsecured, as I said before, and ripped their heads off. Now it was me, a recruit instructor, that was getting my head ripped off by the platoon sergeant. And I hadn't known about any of this until he started beasting me and saying, basically, "What have you done? You bloody cav guys, you're all the same. It's coming in and ruining this platoon, and you just wait. You'll be out of here before you ever know it." And he was beasting me. And I said, "I'm sorry, Sarge, what are you talking about? Don't give me that. You know exactly what I'm talking about." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "What's this?" And he held the letter up in front of my face. I said, "I've not seen that before." And I said, "I've not done anything," because it didn't really say that I had or hadn't done anything. And anyway, they were beasting and hooking into me, and he said, "That's bullshit." So he gets the recruits out onto the admin line beside me, and he's ripping into them, and they start crying, and they said, no, nothing's happened. No, nothing, absolutely nothing has happened. Like, it's all just talk. It's all just talk. And anyway, they got excused, and then I got excused, and then I got an apology later just to continue to keep my head down. So that was the start of my recruit instructing there for the next 18 months.
And that would have been a challenge, mate, because I can sort of see it in the sense that you're being accused of something that you hadn't done, and to handle it the way you did, especially as a young, like 23, 24-year-old, like there's some maturity on in the way that you handled it, like it's to be accused of something and Sarge, I didn't, this is all, so mate, well done to you to not losing your cool. Well, obviously you can't because of the rank structure, but you can't go off at your sergeant, but yeah, to mate, absolute maturity on your shoulders to handle it the way you did.
No, I don't think it's any surprise. Like, maybe if I'd been in that position for another year or two, but, already you're the new guy on the block, you're the junior guy on the block. It's all still an eye-opener to me, so I'm learning all the system, and it's all very intimidating even to me, when you go back and you're like, ooh, you still get that recruit vibes that you got way back when. So, but no, you just dealt with it, right? And if you've got nothing to hide, or if you haven't done anything, then it's quite easy to just not get worked up. But
I can, mate, and look, and tongue in cheek with you sitting across from you, I can see why they start, mate. You're a pretty good looking rooster,
Stop
mate.
it.
So,
Stop
you're a good looking rooster. I can see it, mate. So
yeah, thankfully, nothing come of that. But yeah, many a guys had sort of not had the same fate. But yeah, no, it was crazy times.
So. What were, obviously, you mentioned that you'd been there 18 months, and was it good to give back? Like, it was good to get some young recruits through, and then we will move forward now into your next part of your career where, mate, you sort of went a totally different, well, profession, I guess, like totally different. But so, mate, we mentioned that you finish your recruit training down at Kapooka, and then you transfer into being into the Helos. And how is this transferring into being into the Helos? And what was it a hard process? And where did this come from? Like, it's totally left of field.
It came from a couple of different places. So I guess aviation was always in my blood. My father worked for Qantas for 35 years as aircrew, and so I think it was always my inclination to want to someday get into aircrew. And yeah, I guess it was while I was down at Kapooka, I reflected on my time at 2CAV and you know why I potentially moved on, and I thought, well, I've ticked everything that I wanted as per the list out of 2CAV, and you know, like I said, when I first went there, it was for the job, not the location. I thought, well, now I'm probably that priority is pivoting a little bit. And back then, CAV was a critical trade, which meant that they were short numbered. So there was like a recruiting sort of priority put on trying to get more people into the Corps. And if you're classified as a critical trade, you can't transfer out of it for that reason. But when you go to Kapooka, you're no longer it's an out of Corps posting. So you're no longer in a critical trade position, so now you can transfer. So that enabled me while I was at Kapooka to be able to transfer. So, and really it was working with that Black Hawk dust-off crew in the Middle East and saw them and seeing the amazing work that they were doing. I thought that's pretty cool. And what a rewarding job. And I thought, yeah, okay, I think I want to do something like that. And that's, I applied while I was at Kapooka and got supported. And it took about 6 months. And it was quite intense, the process, a number of psych evaluations for both, obviously, how you are mentally, but also, not just psychologically, but in terms of your cognitive ability, your learnability skills, they did a lot of interviewing, which is surprising. So, to assess how much you wanted it, basically, to see how much they would sit you down and ask you all questions about the role and see how much you knew. And went through that and a number of other processes and ended up in Oakey and near in Queensland, near Toowoomba, doing the selection course, which is about a week, where you did a heap of swim tests and fitness tests and a learnability exercise of getting put through a simulator after being taught a very small component of the course to see how much you remembered and how you performed. And ended up getting selected for that.
And because you had your own challenges that you had to overcome too, because you were partly colourblind, is that right? So this was, you had your own challenges that you had to overcome, and it was, I guess, in a sense for you, like it would have been a hard transition from being being CAV to going into something totally new, or were you just, I'm mission focused again. Yep. This is where I need to get. This is what I need to do. And is colourblind, so you can still fly with colour, or is it? Yeah. So you've got partial colourblindness. Is that right? Yeah.
So there's generically three classifications, particularly within defence. It's 1, 2, and 3. I can't remember which side of the scale it is, whether 1's more severe or 3 is more severe, but basically I was number 2. So it wasn't, it wasn't severe enough for, and the first time I knew about that was when I was recruited as a reservist, which back then I didn't know what I wanted to do, but, if I was offered to go aircrew, I probably would have gone it. But I guess that fate was cemented when they said, well, I failed the Ishihara test, I think it is. If you've been to your doctor and they put that book out in front of you that's got all the dots in it.
Yeah, I'm borderline myself, and yeah, it's funny. I can actually pick up the dots and trace them, but sometimes my brain can't with my own disabilities. And I know what you're talking about because I had that the other day when I did my medical for work, and she was like, "That's weird that you can pick up the dots, but you can't." And I could trace where the dots were, but I just couldn't. And she's like, "You're borderline colorblind," but I also suffer binocular vision. So I actually don't know if it's my binocular vision that plays on or I could be colorblind because I know the colors. Like it's weird. Yeah. It's that test. Yeah, it's just a weird test. So
yeah. So back then, you couldn't be a pilot, even with a minute amount. So that changed since. Even now, holding a Class 1 commercial pilot's license, it doesn't mean anything now. But I guess back then they were just more on the side of just caution. Just they had options to not take people that had that, so they chose that. So I just went and did some specialist testing and obviously passed that, and that's where they determined exactly what type it was, and it was an acceptable level. So continued on.
So you passed the course, and then you started as loadmaster that you started as, or
I was aircrewman, so interchangeable.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we used to be called like a loadie or a loadmaster. It was like a term taken from the Air Force.
Yep.
From their fixed wing guys, but they just sort of rebadged it because actually loading things was a lot less of what it used to be than now. Yeah.
So what was training like? Was it intense? Like you obviously passed your testing and what was training like once you started?
Yeah, it was about another 6-month course or thereabouts. It was pretty intense. Yeah, I went straight on to learning on the Black Hawk, so it wasn't like it was on a little trainer. It went straight to the Black Hawk. It was fast paced. You had to keep up. Every flight, it could have been your last flight. So, it was very intense. Yeah.
And so obviously once you passed your initial training and then you deployed quickly once you got in. So what squadron did you fall into to get your deployment overseas?
Yeah. So, a bit like that Cav Scout role in the regiment where that's where you started. Same at 6th Aviation Regiment where I ended up in Sydney. They had 2 squadrons, and one was sort of the green role that looked after all of Army and did the traditional Army sort of flying around, and there was a black role which was special operations. So I started in the green role, and that's where you sort of find your feet and get some experience up and get your hours up. And I think I was maybe in that squadron for 6 months, maybe, and then the cyclone hit Vanuatu.
And what was that deployment like for you? That you got to Vanuatu, and very different to Afghanistan, a very humanitarian sense in a role. What was that like for you? And what was rewarding about that trip?
Yeah, probably you answered that question yourself. Like the most rewarding part about that was it was a humanitarian mission. So it was absolutely chalk and cheese. We'd gone from fearing the locals to now you couldn't get any closer to them, or them to you. Like they're just such amazing people, and the ability to give back in that after having done what we'd done in the Middle East. It's sort of it was really rewarding, good for the soul.
Polar opposites of two
things. Sort of making up for the sins of your past, but it was brilliant. Yeah, it was just that pinch yourself moment of sitting in the back of a C-17 on your way to Vanuatu with you couldn't stretch your feet out because you'd kicked the tire of the Black Hawk, which had been folded up and put in the back of the aircraft with you like it was a piece of luggage. That's how we got them there. Yeah, on our way to Vanuatu, I think that was maybe 48 hours notice for that.
Yeah, right. And because how long was that one? Was that was a month
that
deployment?
Was a month,
yeah, right. Yeah. And it was, and I guess in a sense for you, so you were there, distributing food and all that sort of stuff as well, and getting them back on their feet, and that would have been really, really, as you say, a rewarding deployment. And then you come back, and then you transition into 171 Squadron, which, as you mentioned before, is you got the green side where you go and do the army stuff, and then you got the special forces stuff. And I know you can't talk about too much of that, but how did that come about, and what was it like being at the sharp end of aviation in that sense of the word?
Yeah. It was good. Another selection process down. Another make sure you fit the mold to go over there. That you've got the prerequisite experience and that's measured by flight hours in your book. And then you're put on a special operations aircrew course, that was about a month long. and then it was another parcel sort of fail course, and yeah, it exponentially increased the level of skill required for that role. It's already there was significant enough for the green role, but now you're throwing yourselves at buildings at the middle of the night under night vision goggles, roping to the top of a skyscraper in Sydney Harbour or to a ferry or whatever it might be. It was a lot more fast paced.
Because it's different, isn't it, to the sense of, we'll talk about you going into your toll rescue site in a minute. Not a lot of winching in that sort of, a lot more fast roping, all that sort of. So yeah, not a lot of winching, and is it still the same concept of the guys like when we winch, they're on the wander lead and all that sort of thing? Is that up there? Or is it more there? Is it different? Is it a different role?
Yeah, it's a similar concept, but largely different. So yeah, it was still a little bit of winching, but not heaps. It was, you're right. So fast rope and caving ladder, or just land on if we could, land in a park or something, or put wheels on the top of a building, we would. But yeah, similar in that. Yeah, I mean, you're still required to be restrained in the aircraft, but being special operations, and not because it's special operations, but it's because of the level of training that both you and the operators are put through, that things weren't necessarily as babied, I guess, for lack of a better term. So yes, I was still on wander lead, but it was very much a reduced system, far more streamlined and easier to use.
The wander leads are great fun in there.
Yeah, you have to be able to get off them quickly.
Yes,
So at 30 seconds to run, they would be sort of unrestrained, so they'd come off any connection point to make sure that they got out the door to do their job quickly. So it was always a balance between safety and obviously achieving the mission.
Are they still like how we have it? And I'm talking school with you now. Like, are they part of the crew as well? Like they're doing lookout for you and all that sort of stuff? Or no, not at all. It's very different to how we do it. Yeah, we become part of the crew. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's very different. So we already have quite a large crew, so 2 pilots and 2 air crewmen in the back of the aircraft. So you already have more than enough sort of support in terms of having eyes out and making sure that we're safe. So those that you have in the back are generally there to do one job, and they do it extremely well. We'll look after the aviation, but they're still put through a course to teach them how to fast rope and ladder and winch and operate in an aircraft. But at the end of the day, that's not their main concern. Yeah. And
tell me how fun Hewitt training is. Do you have fun with that, or is it you always hate it, or it's not too bad?
That's the helicopter underwater escape training. I teach that as well now. There's no better way to get over something than it is to teach it. So, I don't mind it. Yeah, there are people that love it or hate it. You're crazy if you love it, and you're probably sane if you hate it. But I know I enjoy it. Yeah.
It's you always ask that, and most people go, hate it. Hewitt training, go underwater and get rolled, and
exactly.
And it's always cold, and So you were living a very fast-paced life at that stage, and how long were you in 171 before you decided to pull the pin and sort of transition out of the army?
I did that for about 2.5 years, full time, give or take. It was incredibly fast paced. I even moved, I moved from where I was living at the time to a place, which is a shitty place just outside the front gate of Holsworthy, really, in the local suburb, just because we would fly that much, we would work that much, we were on call that often, and I knew that going into it. So I just thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to let it consume me for the next couple of years, do it well, do it good, hopefully have someone to replace me, and then hand over the reins. So I did that for about that time. Yeah,
right. And what was your, obviously I'm guessing same as Cav, there's always with you, there's a next move. Where am I going? What am I doing in the role? And so the transition out, was that an easy process for you to transition out, and obviously was your discharge sped up to then go in the civvy sector, or how did this come about?
You're right. So it was. I knew that's where I wanted to be someday. I had to. I was still thoroughly enjoying the job that I was doing, and that was the sort of. It's often the misconception. A lot of people do leave disgruntled, and I get that. All the best to them. But a lot of people do genuinely leave because they want to do something else, and I think we should be supporting that and not. Thinking that
you don't want to be the disgruntled person that's there just for 30 years or something.
Yeah, exactly. And so that, unfortunately, what comes with a lot of those roles is those fast pace. And again, referring to when you allow it to consume your life so much that, for someone else seeing me leave, that was their life and that was their brainchild, or that was their thing. For me leaving, it was like I was leaving because I hated them and hated the job. So leaving is not always the best reception out of defence because they just think that you don't want to drink the Kool-Aid anymore, and that's fine. You leave. We don't care. We don't. Wasn't quite drastic, but
just a number.
Yeah, it was just a number. But yeah, for me it was again that's what I wanted to do, and a buddy of mine worked on the ambulance rescue helicopter who was ex-Army Aircrew and said, we've actually got a job going if you want to come over and have a look around for a tour and see what you think. And basically I did and came back and put in for leave without pay or a discharge. And they said, we're not going to accept your leave without pay. We're just too short staffed. And I said, well, here, I'll take that back and I'll see you a discharge, which they can't refuse. And I said, okay, fine, we'll take the leave without pay one. So, I took leave without pay, and I didn't really discharge at all. I just transferred to the reserves. So, but that process, that was pretty quick. I think about a month or so. Yeah, right. Maybe a little bit more. I can't remember. But I knew it was not prolonged. They were pretty good with it because if you had a letter of offer to somewhere, it did speed that up rather than just leaving for nothing, which was their way of just having a cooling off period sort of thing. And ended up within a couple of months on the ambulance helicopter.
So what was that process like? Because obviously you joined the army. Army was your life, and coming back to being like Civvy Street, and I'll call it Civvy Street. What was that like? Because obviously you were in defence. Defence, they have a set way that they do things. How hard was the transition to go into the rescue side of things, and was there a little bit of frustration at the start, or was it, oh no, this is the process of how it works? And what was that like for you?
No, it was fine. Yeah, I felt like it was pretty seamless because it's a very similar role in aircrew, and a lot of the people that work in that sector are majority defence, ex-defence. Yeah. At least 3/4 of them are ex-defence. So it was just a different uniform in a job that was 4 days on, 4 days off, and you had your life back and you had time back, and it was no frustrations at all. It was a quick process. Obviously, commercial operations, businesses now, you've got to consider the cost of flight training and stuff. So it was pretty cutthroat. You needed to make sure that I think I had about 4 or 5 training flights to assess where I was at and to convert my skills to the EMS, the emergency medical service helicopter world, and then I was into it.
So for people who aren't aware, obviously the rescue side of things, so you've got a pilot, the crewie, and do you run as a crew of 3 or is it you run as a crew of 4? Yeah, okay. So you've got pilot, co-pilot, and
no, so it's a pilot, air crewman, or air crew officer as we call them in Civvy Street, a doctor and paramedic.
Okay, yeah, right. And so are you going down the wire with them? Like, is that it's just the doctor that goes down, or how's it work?
Yeah, so it's a single pilot operation, so it only needs one pilot to operate the machine. So when I'm not in the back, I'm in the front left-hand seat acting as a co-pilot, basically. Navigation, radios, and coordination piece, and helping back up the captain. And then when we need to winch, I'll jump in the back and I'll winch out the paramedic. So I'm also qualified as a rescue crew officer to go down the wire as well. But in the operation I work in, we use a paramedic to do that role. Yep. And the doctor is also winch capable as well.
Yeah, right. And mate, I've heard it on comms, and you're talking. You're 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Yep, you're clear. Yep, clear of this. Clear. Mate, it's unbelievable what you've got to do, and essentially when they're on the winch, you're in charge of that helicopter, and it's the pilot does an amazing job, because for people who aren't aware, a hover is the most dangerous point for a helicopter. It's they try and do it the least amount of time as they can, because it's not a safe. And mate, when I first started, I couldn't believe how easy they are when they're off the ground. You can walk them. You can walk you can virtually push the helicopter around to where you want it to go.
Yep.
And couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
I was like, wow. But yeah, you're in control, and it's amazing to see and that's. Is that you build up a trust? Like, obviously you're working with a lot of these pilots, and you're a pilot yourself, and that's amazing. Like it's and what do you find the most rewarding part of being an air rescue crewman? Like, is that for you? Is it getting into remote areas that necessarily you've got to work out a plan of attack of how you're going to get in, and what is the most rewarding part for you?
I wouldn't necessarily say that's the most rewarding part. That is definitely one of the most satisfying parts of the job. Is a complex rescue. That's difficult to get into in the first place. It's challenging. Everyone likes people I guess like me like to be challenged and pushed and pressured safely. That is. So that absolutely that I get a lot of satisfaction out of jobs that are challenging. The most rewarding for me is quite obviously the patient at the end of the day. So is getting someone to definitive healthcare that wouldn't otherwise get it if we weren't able to do that. So that for me is the most rewarding, when I can get someone that's quite unstable to a hospital, and where they need to be. So that for me at the end of the job is if I can have a challenging rescue with a patient that's quite unstable, and I get them to where they need to be, then that's both satisfying and rewarding, incredibly. And
so for people who aren't aware, how does it come in through emergency services that we need you guys to respond to us, we need air rescue winch? Like how's that work? Like do you work on a pager system, or how's it work?
No, so it's a full-time 24/7 operation, both day and night shifts, and it's based on a sort of a bat phone system. So, for example, if someone has a car accident way out west or something, and someone calls 000, it goes to the 000 call centre. They then determine whether it's police, fire, or ambulance that needs to take the call. So then, for our ambulance will take it. They'll either do one of two things. They'll either wait until a local ambulance crew turns up to triage to work out, okay, is it as bad as it seems? Or if the caller gives enough sufficient information confidently that it sounds like it's pretty bad, then the ambulance dispatcher, the call taker will then send it to dispatch, and long story short, it ends up getting to the helicopter specialists within the ambulance, the call centre, and then they, who are in charge of all the aeromedical assets in the state, and then they will determine who's the nearest base, most appropriate asset, and then they'll call our base, and we have a bat phone, we call it. So it goes through all the speakers through the base, and then we gather around the phone or the computer around the Google Maps, and then take the call, and that's where it starts.
Yeah, right. And is it a standard 12-hour shift, or so it's 7 till 7, or
exactly?
It works?
Yeah,
fair. Yeah, right. And all hours of the night can be.
Yep.
Yeah, right. So with that, in that sense, obviously with flying, obviously it's more dangerous at night. Do you guys wear the night vision?
Yep.
Sort of. Yeah. Okay. So that's how it works.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
Is it rare to get called in at night, or does it happen more than what people would think?
It's probably 50-50 of
Yeah,
the time.
okay.
Some nights you'll have a full night in bed.
Yep.
Others you'll be out all night, and some you might get 1 or 2 jobs. So
Yeah, okay.
yeah, just naturally, obviously, people tend not to do a lot of things at night. So those primary missions, being the O Corps missions, tend to quieten down a little bit.
Yep.
But not always. You can still have those significant car accidents and stuff at night, and any number of other
Yep.
emergencies. But yeah, it's probably 50% of the time you'll get something.
And is it right around the state? Like you can be, okay. So
Yeah.
there's not a hub here, a hub there.
So there are 2 operators in New South Wales, and
Yep.
obviously we're one of them, and we've got 4 bases around the place, so which all have their own jurisdiction. But if they're already out on a job, or if they're offline for whatever reason, then then the next base will absorb that area.
Yeah, right. And also you mentioned to me off air that you started your own business as well. So
Yeah.
what's this entail? What do you do with your flying side of
Yeah.
things?
So yeah, in that time, in classic true form, I thought, well, what's next? So I went off and got my pilot's license, and both
we touch on that too. Yeah,
both aeroplane and helicopter, and then we're sort of working at a local scenic school, as well as doing the rescue as a crewman, and just getting my hours up when I was sort of approached by one of the sales managers for one of the basically a helicopter dealership. Said, "Oh, do you want to do some? You want to move some aircraft for me, basically in and out of service or around the country delivering them?" And of course, I jumped at that, and the requirement was to be a contractor and start my own ABN and start my own business. So now, one of my other little side hustles is to pick up helicopters wherever they are around the country and fly them to where they need to be.
Yeah, right. And you also, on top of running your own business and doing what you do, and still a fiery and still a reservist, and you're actually, so you deployed to Canada in 2021, was it?
Yeah,
Or, and
21.
21, and in the middle of COVID, and how did this come about for you?
Well, I guess the Canadians had a terrible fire season. Back in 21, so it was that August, I think, July, August.
Mm-hmm.
So the RFS just have an online, the National Resource sort of coordination centre have a database of people that are deployable both internationally and domestically. So you just keep that up to date, and the call went out to, hey, if you're interested in going, then let us know. And within, I think, about 4 days, I was on my way to Canada.
Yeah, right.
In the middle of Sydney's biggest lockdown, so I was not going to turn down that opportunity to get out of here.
And what was your main role over there? Like, what were you doing? Was it an IMT role, like for our military people and first responders know what IMT roles are?
Yeah.
So, what were you doing over there?
Yeah, so it was incident management. So they generally are pretty good at supplying firefighters for the long term. But if it's a prolonged season, much like we have, there's only so many managers you can have that, by a certain point they get burnt out, they need leave, you need to take time. So I went over as what they call an operations chief. So basically in charge of implementing the strategic and tactical plan of the incident commander.
Yep.
On a fire down in southeast BC.
Yeah, right.
And then ended up actually incident commanding that fire for the last sort of week of that.
Yeah, right.
While I was over there, yeah.
And mate, you're going again. You're off again.
As we speak.
We speak. I'm sitting in your home recording with you, and mate, you're off in a couple of days.
Yeah,
here we go again, round 2. So nice. It's it's good to, mate. I've heard it's pretty bad over there, and mate, I might see you over there. So
hopefully that's the case.
I'm on standby at the moment myself.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Hopefully when this is out, mate, I'll be over there with you going,
exactly.
But you, so for you, what is it like being a crew is pretty cool. Like it's a pretty cool job. But for you, what do you love about flying? What do you get? What's the buzz that you get from flying?
It's flying. Who doesn't love being
pretty,
sort of
pretty
up,
cool.
up? Everyone wishes they could grow wings and fly, and it's the best I can get to doing that. I guess it comes down to the challenge and the excitement of it. More recently, thanks to my work, I've been sort of trained up to fly a big aircraft. So, I get to fly a $20 million helicopter around the state occasionally, and that's just amazing. I love big tech. I love these big machines. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just it's a new adventure. I've done the military thing for a while and the air crewing stuff for a while, and I think now I'm sort of due for a bit of a take a different fork in the road and go down a different avenue.
And I think for you, mate, you seem always you've been a go-getter and someone, and with people who are successful, and I class you, James, as a very successful person. People say, and I guess you've probably had this thrown to you, you're so lucky, but it's not just luck that you've got to where you are, and you've had to sacrifice a lot along the way, and as you said to me at the start, schooling wasn't you've had to work hard for these exams to pass, and you've also had to get your flying hours up and all this sort of thing. So it's not just luck. It's been a lot of hard work and sacrifice made by you. And do you, when you're talking to people about like the mindset of where you've gone from, reservist, choco to cav to now, the sharp end of flying, what advice would you give to them to maybe go for that challenge that they think is just outside their grasp, and what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I guess I'll be the cynical and take the cynical approach and tell you that luck doesn't exist. There is no luck. It's no such thing. Luck is the excuse people give to those that have made it through their own process. Sure, you've got things that are out of your control that might put you in a position that favours you more than anyone else. That's not luck. You've done everything that you have to be at that position, whether it be at the right place, right time, or whatever you've done in the past has led you to that point. So it's all about setting yourself up and not. And I say to people, don't have a vision of the end game, but don't plan for it. And that sounds a bit. Well, you're like, what do you mean? Don't plan for the end game? I said, no, I plan for the next step. You plan for the end game, you'll get lost in all the noise. There's a sort of famous saying that comes out of a children's book. Actually, it's about a horse and a boy are trying to make their way through the woods, and they come across a heavily wooded tree line, and the horse can't see a way through, and it turns to the boy and said, I don't know how to get through this. I can't see a way through. And the boy says, well, can you see your next step? And the horse says, yeah, I can see that. And he said, well, just take that. Yeah, and I think it's for people like me as well, that I can find it very overwhelming sometimes, where if I want to be somewhere, I can see there's a difficult road to get there. That for me can be a challenge. That for me is like, because I am generally someone that wants it yesterday. I want to do that yesterday. I'm
very much like you. Yep.
I don't have a lot of patience.
Yep.
So for me to want the end game, it's very hard to see it. But that's why I turn the next step into that goal, because then that next step is achievable tomorrow.
Yep.
I can do that tomorrow, and then that'll just change. The next step is the next one, and the next one, and so on and so forth. So I guess out of all that noise, is that just take the next step.
I think it's great advice for any young listener that listens to this podcast, because, mate, I'm the same. Like, I've just written a book, and Mark Wales did the forward for me. Joanna Griggs has done a testimonial for me. So, and it's been hard work to get them to and mate, with all the disabilities that I've had along the way, like my ADHD with learning difficulties, my binocular vision, weighing 165 kilos and then losing 66 kilos in the last 4 years, it's been hard work. It hasn't been, and I think, like you say, it's not like people have said to me, like I've met Victoria Cross recipients. I've met so many amazing people like yourself and so many others, but it's just been hard work. Like it hasn't been. I haven't been gifted anything. Like when I started the podcast, I had no media training. I just had to run with. I jumped in the deep end and went, okay, well, let's see where this goes. And it's just been something that's turned into a passion that I love. And I think, like you say, right place, right time. in Mark's Forward, he said to me that I reached out to him like I did with you, and he said that he was busy, and he said he put it off for 6 months, and he said, look, come back to me in 6 months, and 6 months later I was on his doorstep.
Yeah, nice.
So, and it's the tenacity of not giving up, and that's my advice to anyone who's successful. It's hard work. It's nothing else. It's staying disciplined, like you've said as well. It's staying disciplined, staying true to the mission, staying, and like you say, have the end goal inside of where you want to be. Like, and like I'm the same as you. It's just simply, and mate, I'm impatient. I go, come on, I want this now. But with all the challenges that I've had to overcome myself, it's writing a book, mate, has been the hardest thing I've ever had to do, because I'm not my English and my writing is crap. Like I was terrible at school. I had to work my butt off just to get above average. So I think, to have the book is a massive accomplishment.
Absolutely.
It's huge. And people have said, how did you go about it? And I said, well, simply you just have your goal and you go, this is going to turn into a book. Like it's like anything in life. You're going to get to that point where you need to get to. And I'm very much like you. I don't believe it's luck. I believe in hard work. Anything that comes, and anything that my parents were the same as your parents. Work hard for everything you got, and that's it. You're living proof of that, mate. And I guess you mentioned You mentioned that you sort of want to branch off down sort of where you are now, and what are the plans going forward for you? And we mentioned, you've got you're a parent, so what are the plans going forward is for you career wise, and obviously being a parent? What are your plans going forward?
Yeah, well, it's like the rest of the process has been along the way. Obviously don't like making things easy for myself. So it's all that journey is still unfolding. I just, the end state is to be, a full-time rescue pilot, or a police pilot one day. That goal is sort of 5 to 10 years off. So it's good to know it's there. That's where I want to be. I'm 34. I'm not quick to rush to that process, because once you get there, then I've got to find something else to do, and I'm running out of ideas.
Yeah.
So for me, it's going to end up being probably having to move out of my organisation to pursue a pilot job to get the experience and get the time up and see some different other operations before I can perhaps come back to mine or something similar. As you said, I've got a 7-year-old daughter now, year 1 this year, and so keeping her in the mix and making sure that she's supported and set up and hopefully has been brought up with that mindset of just getting after it and finding something you want to do and getting into it. The risk of sort of diminishing any dreams that anyone has, I'm also a realist too. I know that not everyone can do everything. It's important that I don't subscribe to the saying that if you put your mind to it, you can achieve it. Unfortunately for some people, it just will not come. And I don't want to set people up with false hopes, right?
I agree, mate.
But having said that, you need to I think it's not just, I don't have it, so I'm going to lose that dream. It's like, no, you just need to speak to a lot of people, chat to people in it, get some advice from people that are in it, and hopefully they're going to give you some solid advice and go, no, mate, that's insignificant. Keep at it. Or they'll tell you, don't waste your time or your money. Find a new dream.
Mate, I had that myself. I wanted to serve my country. It's been a dream of mine for the longest time that I always wanted to serve my country, and I failed my aptitude test, mate. And that was hard. That was hard, that my dream was shattered. Yeah. That the one thing that I wanted to do in my whole life couldn't do it. Yeah. And, people have said, I'll try again. And I'm like, well, do I try again and go through the same? But look, mate, it's been amazing that the people that have, once I came out and said, I was struggling with failing and having, mate, so many of my veteran mates got around me and said, mate, we'll help you, we'll help you with your aptitude test. Like if it's just the aptitude test, but with everything else that I've had go on, like with my binocular vision and all that sort of stuff, I don't know whether that would, you just don't know. But I guess, I can't say that I haven't tried. I actually did try, and like you say,
sometimes you got to be a realist too, and you understand that there's just certain things that you want to do but you can't do. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think there is a silver lining to it all. Like I said, I'm not too much of an airy fairy when it comes to it. I'm pretty black and white. But there's another, Chinese proverb or story, whatever you want to call it. I was just reading the other day that this farmer and this young boy, they had a horse, and the horse escaped, and then the neighbours of the town came around and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, your horse is your working horse. It was the only thing you had." And he said, "Oh, it might be a problem, it might not, I don't know yet." And the town like, "Well, you lost a horse. What do you mean?" So the next day, the horse comes back with 2 more horses because it found friends, and now they've got an extra 2 horses.
Yeah.
And then the son gets on the horse and goes to break it in, and unfortunately falls off the horse, breaks his back. And the town comes around and says, "Sorry, it's your son." And he said, "Well, I don't know if it's bad or good yet. I'm not sure." You might think, well, the son's broken his back. How's that good? Well, then the military come around the next day and said, "We're taking all able-bodied males to war."
Yeah, right.
The son can't go to war. So I guess the whole point of all that gibberish is that you now, unfortunately, didn't serve in the military, but you're serving your state, you're serving in the RFS, and with any luck, you'll serve the country on the international stage, whether it be this trip or the next one or whatever it be. You will serve. You are serving now, and you'll serve on that international stage. And who knows, mate? Who knows what could have happened if you joined the military? You may not have had the same fate.
Yeah, true. Very, very true, mate. Mate, I say it in the very sense of the word that I'm passionate about, and Mark said it in his forward, that I'm very passionate about giving back to first responders and veterans, and that's I cried when he wrote what he wrote, mate, and it was. It is. I simply just care, and when I spoke to you, we spoke off air a lot, and you've been on a couple of other podcasts, and very different to how they do it and how I do it, and yeah, I think pretty much as you said straight away, I can tell that there's a genuine care for and there is, mate. I generally, this is my way of giving back too. It's I feel that I just simply care, and that goes a long way in life. Like if you show compassion and care towards others, it can get you a long way and open a lot of doors that would never open if you just if you're not at the, as you say, right place, right time, but also being a genuine person.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's right. So no, I thank you for those words, mate. They mean a lot. And if you could go back now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
Nah, he wouldn't give a shit. He'd tell me to screw off, old man. I don't. Yeah, it probably goes back to the whole horse in the tree. It's just there probably were a few occasions where I got wrapped around the axles too much about where I wanted to be, and not being there, and perhaps other priorities in my life fell away. It's just enjoy those moments and take one step at a time. You'll get there. Yeah. You'll get there if you're suitable and capable for it. It'll happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. And there's one thing that I want to finish with, mate, and I'll finish with a quote that I guess for you, in the sense of looking back now and where your journey of where you've got to in your life, and as you mentioned, you're still young, mate, 34, but a well-lived experience of knowledge and life experience in those 34 years. Was joining the Army still the best decision you ever made in your life, or where it's got you to where you are now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And I think it's important to understand that where you start is not where you finish. So I came from, despite me not doing so well at school, I came from quite an academic family that all went to uni and all did really, really well in their field. And I elected to join the Army, which wasn't probably the most supported decision ever made. But if it wasn't for that and them not appreciating the end game, to go from that choco cav scout shit kicker working in a bar to potentially where I am now, it set me up 100% for success. And that's why I will tell anyone, if they don't know what they want to do and they have any inkling of the military, join it. I don't subscribe to that excuse if someone's in the military and go, I hate this job, it's a terrible job. Well, have you looked at all the other 99 jobs that are in defence? And that's all I did. I used the system, bounced around, put in what I got out, and I would absolutely not be here without it.
It's great advice, mate, because there's a lot of people that, go and be, and I'm not taking anything away from go and be a labourer, and that's their whole career. That's what they do,
Yep.
and don't go and do the skills to upskill yourself, and it's like you say, the military is it's a great learning tool. It's a great way to go and do a trade or go and do something and then get out and start your own business or do something like that. So, if there are young people out there listening, maybe take James's advice and say, actually, you know what, I might just go and do 4 years, and it might be the best 4 years of my life, because just the experiences that you'll gain coming out from those 4 years. Absolutely, mate. Great advice. You know? And there's a quote, mate, that I believe this sums up your story. James, your story is one of true grit, determination, and aiming to fly high. Literally, mate. Your story is one of true resilience, never giving up, no matter how hard it must have been. And I would like to finish with this quote. All your dreams can come true if you have the courage to pursue them. You have had the courage to pursue big dreams and aim high and are living your dreams. You are an inspiration to anyone who wants to pursue their dreams as well, mate. So
I appreciate it.
Thank you, James. Thank you, mate, I would like to thank you for coming on True Blue Conversations and sharing your story, mate. Thank you for what you do originally as a first responder and still a first responder. And also thank you for your service in the military. And, mate, thank you for everything you do for veterans and first responders who are struggling. And, mate, be safe if I don't get over with you, be safe over there. And I look forward to catching up with you when you're back and maybe go for a fly with you, mate. It'd be good to catch up and go and see some sights with you.
Yeah, there's a good idea. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, mate. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And
thanks, mate.
And allowing to hear some stories, and look forward to reading your book, mate.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts.